A woman no one bothered to remember was about to become the only reason a Mafia princess lived through the night. At the Grand Aurelia Hotel, where chandeliers glittered like frozen stars, and rich men bought mercy with clean checks and dirty money, Lena Morley moved through the shadows with a trash cart, a stained apron, and a body the world had been cruel enough to turn into a joke. Nobody saw danger coming through the ballroom doors. Nobody believed the tired fat cleaner with aching feet and soft hands when she said something felt wrong. And that was the mistake that would leave blood on the marble, silence in the auction hall, and Dante Varric kneeling beside a woman who had nothing to offer him except the one thing his violent world had nearly forgotten existed. The Grand Aurelia Hotel rose over the city like a palace built for people who never had to count the price of anything. Its gold-framed windows burned bright through the evening fog. Its front entrance was lined with black cars, white roses, and men in expensive coats who smiled like gentlemen while their bodyguards watched the street with cold eyes. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished wood, fresh lilies, and money. Everything shined. The floors were so clean they reflected the ceiling. The chandeliers threw soft light over velvet chairs and marble pillars. Even the silence felt expensive. Lena Morley knew every corner of that hotel better than most of the managers who walked through it with tablets in their hands and pride in their voices. She knew which service elevator stuck between the kitchen and the second floor. She knew which ballroom carpet held the faint ghost of red wine no machine could fully lift. She knew which guests dropped cash without noticing, and which ones dropped insults because they knew women like her were paid to swallow them quietly. She had been cleaning the Grand Aurelia at night for almost 4 years, and in that time, she had learned to become a gentle shadow. She moved carefully, kept her head down, and tried not to give anyone a reason to make her shift harder than it already was. But people found reasons anyway. At 31, Lena carried her weight with the tired strength of someone who had never had the luxury of being delicate. She was round in the face, soft through the arms and stomach, broad at the hips, and always a little slower at the end of the night when the double shifts made her knees burn. The uniform did her no kindness. The grey shirt pulled across her chest, the black pants pinched at her waist. The apron never sat right, no matter how often she adjusted it. She wore her dark hair pinned back with a cheap clip, though by midnight loose pieces always escaped around her cheeks. She had kind brown eyes, the kind that looked apologetic even when she had done nothing wrong. That was the part people used against her most. Morley, Victor Hale snapped from behind her as she pushed her cleaning cart past the service corridor. Try not to move like you're dragging the whole building behind you. Lena stopped beside the linen room and turned carefully. Victor stood under the harsh ceiling light with his arms folded over his narrow chest. He was the night banquet supervisor, a man who wore his hotel badge like it was a crown. His suit was too tight, his smile too sharp, and his patience always seemed to run out whenever Lena was near. Behind him, 2 younger servers looked away, pretending not to hear. They always pretended. It was easier for everyone that way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale," Lena said softly. "The cartwheel is sticking again. I put in a maintenance note last week." Victor's eyes dropped to her body, then back to her face. His mouth curled. "It is always the cart, or the elevator, or your feet. Maybe if you worked with half the speed of everyone else, we would not have to keep making excuses for you." Lena's fingers tightened around the cart handle. The rubber grip was cracked from years of use, and she pressed her thumb into the split to keep herself steady. She wanted to say she had already cleaned 2 banquet rooms, carried 6 bags of wet linen, scrubbed a guest bathroom after a drunk donor got sick, and skipped her meal break because the floral team had left broken stems all over the east foyer. She wanted to say she had been at the hotel since late afternoon, after spending the morning at the hospital, where a woman behind a desk had looked at her with practiced pity and told her the emergency assistance request had been denied. But Victor did not care about truth. Men like him only cared about power, and his power was making sure women like Lena remembered their place. "I'll go faster," she whispered. "You will do more than that," Victor said, stepping closer. "Tonight is not one of your cheap wedding receptions. The private auction upstairs is worth more than your entire bloodline. Politicians, donors, international guests, people who actually matter. You are assigned to the South Service Hall and the gallery doors. You clean spills, clear glass, and stay invisible. Do not speak to guests unless spoken to. Do not wander. Do not embarrass this hotel." Lena nodded. Victor leaned in just enough for his voice to become meaner. "And for God's sake, don't hover near the food. I don't want complaints." The servers behind him went still. One of them swallowed a laugh and covered it with a cough. Lena felt the familiar burn crawl up her neck. She looked down at the floor until Victor walked away. The worst part was not the insult itself. The worst part was that her body had become public property in rooms where she was otherwise treated like furniture. People who did not know her name felt free to measure her plate, her steps, her breath, her worth. They saw a fat cleaner moving slowly through a hotel hallway and decided the whole story was already written. They never saw Ruby. Ruby was the reason Lena did not quit. Ruby was the reason she tied her shoes every afternoon, even when her arches throbbed. Ruby was the reason she took extra shifts, saved coins in an old coffee tin, and smiled at guests who treated her like something stuck to the bottom of their polished shoes. Ruby was 10 years old, all thin wrists, bright eyes, and stubborn hope. She had been left in Lena's care after Lena's younger sister disappeared into a life of bad men and worse choices. By then, Ruby's lungs had already been damaged by a brutal illness that should have been treated sooner and better than it was. Some mornings, she breathed like the air itself was too heavy. The doctors said surgery could change everything, not fix all of it, not magically give Ruby the childhood she had missed, but give her a chance, a real chance, a chance to run without stopping, a chance to sleep through the night without coughing until her little shoulders shook, a chance to grow up without every cold becoming a threat. And that chance had a price Lena could not reach. Earlier that day, Lena had sat in the hospital billing office with Ruby's bracelet wound around her fingers like a prayer. The bracelet was old now, the print faded from another stay, but Ruby liked when Lena carried it. She said it made her feel like Auntie Lena was fighting the hospital monsters for her. Lena had tried not to cry when the administrator explained that the funding program had closed, that the waiting list was long, that another review might take months. Months. The word had landed in Lena's chest like a stone. Ruby did not have months to waste. So Lena had come to work with swollen eyes, tied on her apron, and pushed her cart into the Grand Aurelia's glittering heart, while the richest people in the city arrived to raise money for children whose names would look pretty in speeches. That was the quiet cruelty of the evening. Upstairs, guests would lift champagne glasses and bid on diamond watches in the name of compassion. Downstairs, Lena had folded Ruby's rejection letter into the bottom of her locker because she could not bear to look at it one more time. The private auction was held in the Aurelia Ballroom, the hotel's most famous room. It had a painted ceiling, balconies wrapped in gold railings, and tall windows hidden behind blue velvet curtains. Along one wall, glass cases displayed jewelry, rare books, signed paintings, and little cards with starting bids that made Lena's stomach turn. There were waiters in white jackets, violinists near the fountain, and guests drifting in soft clouds of perfume and laughter. Security stood near every entrance, but they were hotel security, polished and polite, more used to escorting drunk businessmen than stopping real violence. Lena stayed near the South Service door, exactly where Victor had ordered her to be. She replaced full trash bags, wiped small spills, and collected abandoned cocktail napkins from side tables. Every so often, she let herself glance into the room. It was hard not to. The auction looked like something from a dream, but not a dream meant for her. Women moved through the light in silk gowns that whispered around their ankles. Men wore watches that could pay for Ruby's surgery 3 times over. A city councilman laughed beside a judge. A hotel owner shook hands with a man Lena had seen once on the news and never wanted to see in person. Then Dante Varric arrived, and the room changed. It was not loud. No one announced him. No one needed to. A hush moved through the ballroom before he even crossed the threshold, soft and quick, like wind over black water. Men straightened. Conversations thinned. A few guests smiled too hard. Others looked away too fast. Dante entered in a dark suit that fit him like armor, his black hair brushed back, his face still and unreadable. He was not the biggest man in the room, but he carried himself like everyone else had already agreed to move when he passed. There was a cold discipline in him, a silence sharp enough to cut. Beside him walked a young woman in a pale blue dress. She looked about 20, maybe younger in spirit, with soft features and nervous hands. Her dark hair fell in loose waves down her back, and she stayed close to Dante without touching him, as if she had learned to live inside the circle of his protection. Lena noticed her because she seemed out of place among all that polished hunger. The young woman did not scan the auction items with greed. She looked at the flowers. She smiled shyly at an older woman near the doorway. When a waiter passed too close, she stepped aside and whispered sorry, even though he had nearly bumped into her. "That's Mira Varric," one of the servers murmured behind Lena. "His sister." "The sister?" another whispered. "I thought she never came out." "Dante keeps her locked away," they say, after what happened to their family. What happened? The first server lowered his voice until Lena could barely hear. People who ask that question usually don't ask anything again. Lena looked back at Dante. He had placed himself slightly behind his sister, close enough to watch every face that turned toward her. His eyes moved constantly, not with fear, but with the habit of a man who trusted no room completely. Lena had seen protective people before, tired mothers, nervous husbands, big brothers picking up drunk little sisters from hotel parties. But Dante's protection was different. It was darker, older, almost punishing. He looked at the world as if it had already hurt what he loved, and he was simply waiting for it to try again. Lena should have looked away. Victor had warned her not to stare. But something about Mira held her attention. Maybe it was the way the girl smiled at the auctioneer, and then quickly checked Dante's face, as if asking permission to relax. Maybe it was the careful way she held her small beaded purse with both hands. Maybe it was the faint fear in her eyes that the diamonds and music could not hide. Ruby had that look sometimes before a procedure. The thought softened Lena's chest. A sharp crash split the air. Near the champagne table, Mira had turned too quickly and struck a waiter's tray with her elbow. Crystal glasses toppled and shattered across the marble edge of the refreshment station, sending champagne splashing over the floor and down the front of her pale dress. The music stumbled. Conversation stopped. Mira froze, her face going white. Victor appeared almost instantly, moving with the speed of a man who loved having someone to blame. "What happened here?" he hissed. Mira opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to Dante, who had already turned, his gaze hardening with lethal attention. Lena stepped forward before she had time to think. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering herself carefully to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "That was my fault. I came around the corner with the cart too close and startled her." Victor's face twisted. "Morley." "I'll clean it right away," Lena said. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her voice calm. No one was hurt. Mira stared at her. "But It's all right, miss," Lena said gently, not looking up. "Please don't move. There's glass near your shoes." For a moment, the air around them felt too tight. Dante stood a few feet away, silent, watching Lena with eyes that seemed to notice far too much. Victor looked furious, but he could not explode in front of the guests. not with Dante Varric standing there, so he settled for a smile that promised punishment later. "Clean it," he said, quickly. Lena nodded and reached for the broom clipped to her cart. As she bent, something slipped from the pocket of her apron and skidded across the floor. A small plastic bracelet, pale and worn, came to rest near Mira's silver heel. Mira picked it up before Lena could stop her. "Is this yours?" Lena's breath caught. "Yes, thank you." Mira turned the bracelet in her fingers. "Ruby Morley," she read softly. "Is she your daughter?" "My niece," Lena said, holding out her hand. "She's 10. Mira gave it back with surprising care. "Was she sick?" Lena closed her fingers around the bracelet. The ballroom seemed to blur at the edges. For 1 weak second, she was back in the hospital, hearing that awful word again. Denied. She tucked the bracelet into her pocket and forced a small smile. "She is sick, but she's brave. Braver than most adults I know." Mira's face changed. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," Lena said, though it was not okay at all. She had a bad illness when she was little, and her lungs never got strong after that. "She needs surgery. I'm working on it." Mira looked down at the broken glass, then back at Lena. "And you still helped me." Lena shrugged, embarrassed by the softness in the girl's voice. "You looked scared. I know what that looks like. When I see someone young and frightened, I think of Ruby. I can't just stand there and let them feel alone." Mira's eyes filled with sudden tears. Behind her, Dante did not move, but something in his face shifted. It was small, almost invisible, a crack in stone. Lena had not spoken to him. She did not even know for certain who he was beyond the whispers. She had not lowered her voice to flatter him or offered kindness as a performance. She was kneeling on the floor in a cheap uniform, gathering broken glass with tired hands, and she had protected his sister because, in some private corner of her heart, every frightened young person looked a little like the child she was trying to save. Dante Varric had spent years learning the price of every smile. He knew when fear dressed itself as respect. He knew when loyalty was bought, when devotion was staged, when mercy was performed for an audience. But this woman had not known his power. She had not asked for his attention. She had taken blame that was not hers, and she had done it so quietly that the room nearly missed the miracle of it. He did not miss it. Lena finished sweeping the glass into a pan. Mira stepped back, still watching her like she had discovered something rare in the service hallway of an expensive hotel. Lena offered one last small smile and returned to her cart. Her side ached from bending. Her feet throbbed. Victor's glare followed her all the way to the south corridor, but for once, his cruelty felt far away. The bracelet was safe in her pocket. Ruby was waiting at home with Mrs. Alvarez from next door, probably pretending not to be tired, probably asking whether Auntie Lena had seen any princess dresses at the fancy hotel. Lena smiled faintly at the thought. Then she saw the waiter. At first, there was nothing special about him. White jacket, black bow tie, silver tray. He moved near the balcony stairs, just beyond the pool of light spilling from the ballroom. But Lena had spent too many years watching service staff to miss what was wrong. Real waiters knew how to disappear. They moved around each other without looking. They carried trays like an extension of their own hands. This man held his tray too stiffly, with his fingers spread under the rim. He paused at the wrong doors. He looked at the guests, not the tables, and every few seconds his eyes returned to Mira. A thin, cold feeling slid down Lena's back. She told herself she was tired. She told herself the stress of the hospital had made her jumpy. She told herself people like her were not supposed to notice things important people missed. But the man shifted again, and Lena saw something under the edge of his white sleeve. Not a watch, not a cufflink, something dark strapped tight to his wrist. She pushed her cart toward Victor, who was standing near the service alcove with a clipboard. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, "there's a waiter near the balcony stairs. I don't think he works here." Victor did not look up. Every department has temporary staff tonight. I know, but he doesn't know the service paths. He keeps watching Miss Varric. That made Victor look at her, but only with irritation. Miss Varric, the young woman in blue, Dante Varric's sister. Victor's mouth tightened. Lower your voice. I think something is wrong. No, Victor said, stepping close enough that Lena smelled mint on his breath. What is wrong is you trying to make yourself important in front of guests who do not know you exist. You are not security. You are not management. You are a cleaner. Lena's cheeks burned. Please, just have someone check him. If you embarrass this hotel tonight, Victor said quietly, each word clipped and cruel, I will fire you before sunrise. And with your record of moving slowly and causing disruptions, I promise no hotel in this city will touch you. Lena went still. Ruby's face flashed in her mind. Ruby asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Ruby coughing into her pillow and pretending it was not so bad. Ruby asking if they could go to the winter pier after surgery because she wanted to see the lights and eat roasted chestnuts like kids in movies. Lena looked back toward the ballroom. The fake waiter had moved closer to Mira. Her hands felt cold. Victor followed her gaze and snapped his fingers in front of her face. Back to work. Lena obeyed because fear had been trained into her for years. She turned her cart slowly, heart pounding, and moved toward the edge of the corridor. But she did not stop watching. The auctioneer called out another bid. Laughter rose near the front tables. A woman in emerald silk lifted her paddle. Dante was speaking to an older man near one of the display cases, but his body was still angled toward Mira, always toward Mira. His guards stood on the other side of the crowd, separated by guests, waiters, and the glittering disorder of wealth. Then the lights on the south side of the ballroom went out. Not all of them, just enough. The music cut into a startled whine. Someone gasped. The far corner dropped into shadow, and the guests shifted in confusion. In that single broken moment, the waiter moved. The tray fell from his hand without a sound. His other hand slid under his jacket. A thin blade caught the remaining light as he rushed toward Mira. Lena did not think. Her body hurt. Her feet were swollen. Her breath caught hard in her chest as she ran. But she ran anyway. Chairs scraped. A woman screamed. Dante turned, his face changing from cold control to something raw and terrible. His guards shoved through the crowd, but they were too far. Everyone was too far. Everyone except Lena. She hit Mira with both arms and drove her backward, using every ounce of her soft, heavy body to cover the smaller woman as the attacker reached them. Pain exploded through Lena's side, bright and hot, so sudden that the room vanished around the edges. The force of it stole the air from her lungs. She crashed to the marble floor with Mira beneath her, one arm wrapped around the girl's head, the other braced against the ground. Mira screamed. Lena felt warmth spreading under her uniform. She knew what it was before she looked. She did not look. She held Mira tighter as the attacker shouted above them, as heavy bodies slammed into him, as Dante's men finally dragged him away. The ballroom had become a storm of footsteps, cries and breaking glass, but inside the small space between Lena's arms, Mira was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. "Don't look at him," Lena whispered, though her voice came out thin and broken. "Look at me. You're safe. Just look at me." Mira's terrified eyes locked onto hers. "That's it," Lena breathed. "You're safe." Then Dante was there. He dropped to his knees beside them so hard the marble should have cracked. His hand touched Mira's hair first, fast and desperate, making sure she was alive. Then his gaze moved to Lena, to the blood, to the way Lena's face had gone pale beneath the ballroom lights, to the woman everyone had mocked, dismissed, and ignored, lying between his sister and death, as if her own life had been a small price to pay. For the first time in many years, Dante Varric looked afraid. "Move carefully," he ordered. but his voice was no longer ice. It was rough, almost human. "Get a doctor, now." "I'm okay," Lena tried to say, because poor women learned to say that even when they were bleeding. "Mira?" "I'm here," Mira sobbed, clutching Lena's sleeve. "I'm here. Please don't close your eyes." Lena wanted to answer, but the ceiling had begun to drift farther away. The chandeliers blurred into soft golden circles. Somewhere nearby, Victor was shouting that the hotel was not responsible, that someone had to control the guests, that this was a disaster. His voice sounded small now, foolish, like a man yelling at the ocean. Dante reached for Lena's hand. His fingers closed around hers with a strange carefulness, as if he was afraid his strength might break her. "What is your name?" he asked. She blinked slowly. "Lena." "Lena," he repeated, and the way he said it made her name sound like something the room should have honored from the beginning. "Stay with me." "My niece," she whispered. Dante leaned closer. "What?" "Ruby," Lena breathed. Her fingers twitched toward her pocket, but she did not have the strength to reach it. "Please, if something happens, Mrs. Alvarez, apartment 3B, don't let Ruby be alone." Dante's expression hardened, not with anger, but with a promise so deep it seemed to darken the air around him. "Nothing is happening to you." But as the paramedics rushed in and the ballroom parted at last for the woman it had never cared to see, a small plastic hospital bracelet slipped from Lena's apron pocket and landed near Dante's polished shoe. He looked down and picked it up. The name was faded, but readable. Ruby Morley, Pediatric Pulmonary Unit. Dante closed his hand around the bracelet. All his life, people had begged him for protection because they knew what he could do. They had offered him loyalty, money, secrets, and blood. But Lena Morley had asked for nothing. She had not known his name when she protected Mira. She had not known the weight of his empire, the reach of his revenge, or the value of the life she saved. She had simply seen a frightened young woman and stepped in front of a blade. As the paramedics lifted Lena onto the stretcher, Mira tried to follow, crying too hard to speak. Dante stood slowly, the bracelet still in his fist, and watched Lena being carried out through the grand doors of the Aurelia ballroom. Behind him, the guests whispered. Victor argued. Security shouted. The auction was ruined. The hotel was shaken. The powerful men in the room looked nervous for reasons they could not explain. Dante Varric did not hear any of them. For the first time in years, revenge was not the first thing in his mind. Only Lena, only the woman with tired eyes, a wounded side, and a kind soul the whole city had been blind enough to overlook. The city outside the Grand Aurelia kept moving as if nothing sacred had been broken inside its golden walls. Cars slid through the wet streets, neon signs trembled in the rain, people laughed under umbrellas, unaware that inside the hotel's grand ballroom, a poor woman with blood soaking through her uniform had changed the direction of a dangerous man's life with one desperate act of courage. Dante Varric stood beneath the chandelier light with Ruby Morley's hospital bracelet closed inside his fist, watching the paramedics carry Lena away. For years, he had believed the world was simple. You protected what belonged to you. You punished what threatened it. You paid whatever price power demanded and never looked back. But Lena Morley had stepped in front of death for someone she did not own, did not fear, and did not need. She had done it without a bargain, without a promise, without even knowing the name of the man who would have given kingdoms to stop that blade. And that kind of goodness unsettled Dante more deeply than any enemy ever had. Mira was shaking beside him, her pale blue dress stained with champagne and Lena's blood. She held both hands against her mouth, trying to silence the sobs that kept breaking through her fingers. Dante turned to her at once, and the cold mask he wore for the world softened in a way only his sister ever saw. He cupped the back of her head and pulled her gently against his chest. She clung to him, like she was still a child hiding from thunder. "She saved me," Mira whispered. "Dante, She saved me. She didn't even know me. Dante looked down at the bracelet in his hand. The small plastic band felt impossibly light, yet it carried more weight than the guns under his men's jackets, more weight than the names of every family that owed him fear. "I know," he said, his voice low, "and she will not be forgotten for it." Victor Hale was still talking near the service doors, pale and frantic, trying to build a wall of lies before the truth could reach the hotel owners. He kept saying Lena had caused panic, that she had ignored instructions, that she had thrown herself into the middle of a security matter she could not understand. Dante listened for exactly 11 seconds. Then he turned his head. The room fell quiet before he spoke. Even the guests who had been whispering behind diamond bracelets and crystal glasses seemed to understand that the air had changed. "Bring him to me," Dante said. His men moved without hesitation. Victor tried to step back, but there was nowhere for a small, cruel man to hide when the most feared figure in the city had finally decided to see him clearly. 2 guards guided him forward, with hands firm enough to make his knees weaken. Victor swallowed hard. "Mr. Varric, this has been a terrible incident, but I assure you the hotel staff followed every proper procedure. The cleaner was unstable. She had already caused one disruption near your sister, earlier in the evening. I had warned her to stay out of guest areas, but she was emotional and difficult to manage." Dante studied him in silence. That silence was worse than shouting. It stripped the strength out of Victor's voice piece by piece. "She reported the man to you," Dante said. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. "She told you he did not belong in this room." Victor's eyes flicked toward the hotel owner, who stood near the auction table looking sick. There must have been some confusion. Dante stepped closer. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was no confusion. There was only a woman doing your job better than you while you were too busy humiliating her to listen. By morning, the Grand Aurelia had already begun pretending it had always intended to honor Lena Morley. The hotel released polished statements about bravery. The owners sent flowers to the hospital with a card written by an assistant who had never met her. Victor Hale was removed before breakfast, not in a dramatic scene, not with shouting, but with the quiet efficiency of powerful people protecting themselves when a cruel employee became inconvenient. Security footage surfaced in exactly the right hands. Staff testimonies changed once they realized the truth was safer than Victor's favor. The city news called Lena a hero by noon, but Dante hated the word on strangers' tongues. They said hero because it made the story clean. They did not know her rent was late. They did not know she carried a rejected medical assistance letter folded into her locker. They did not know she had whispered her niece's name while bleeding on a marble floor. At St. Cordelia Medical Center, Lena woke to the soft rhythm of machines and the sharp smell of antiseptic. For a few seconds, she did not know where she was. Then pain bloomed through her side, deep and hot, and the memory returned in broken pieces. The dark corner of the ballroom, the blade, Mira's frightened eyes, Dante's face above her, no longer cold, no longer distant, but shaken, like a man seeing light after years underground. Lena turned her head slowly and found him sitting in the chair beside her bed. Dante Varric did not look natural in a hospital room. The walls were too plain for him, the chair too small, the fluorescent light too honest. His dark suit was gone, replaced with a black shirt rolled at the sleeves, but the danger remained in the stillness of his body. He looked as if he had not slept. "You're awake," he said. Lena blinked at him. Her throat felt dry. "Mira, she is safe," Dante said at once, "because of you." Lena closed her eyes in relief. One tear slipped down the side of her face before she could stop it. "Good." Dante reached for the cup of water on the bedside table and held the straw carefully to her lips. The gesture was so gentle it almost frightened her. Men like him were not supposed to hold water cups for women like her. They were not supposed to sit watch through the night. Lena drank a little, then turned her face away. "I need to call Ruby." "She knows you are hurt," Dante said. "Mrs. Alvarez is with her. Mira spoke to her too. Lena's eyes opened sharply. "You called Ruby?" She was scared. Mira told her you were brave and that the doctors were taking care of you. Lena tried to sit up, but pain dragged her back with a gasp. Dante stood immediately, one hand hovering near her shoulder without touching, until she gave the smallest nod. He helped her settle against the pillows. "I have arranged the best surgical team in the state for Ruby," he said. "Her transfer is already approved. Her operation can happen as soon as the doctors clear her." For a moment, Lena could not breathe. The words were too large, too impossible. Her first instinct was not joy, it was fear. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw the kind of man who could move hospitals with a phone call, remove supervisors before sunrise, and make an entire room go silent by turning his head. "No," she whispered. Dante's brow tightened. "No? I saved your sister because she needed help, not because I wanted payment." "This is not payment. It is money," Lena said, her voice weak but steady. "It is power. It is you taking the worst fear in my life and putting your name on top of it." Dante went still. Lena's eyes shone with tears, but she did not look away. "I am poor, Mr. Varric. I am desperate. I am so tired that sometimes I forget what my own body feels like when it is not hurting. But I still know the difference between kindness and ownership. Ruby is not a debt for you to buy, and I am not something you get to keep because you helped me." No one spoke to Dante like that. Not politicians, not rivals, not men with armies behind them. Yet Lena Morley lay in a hospital bed with stitches in her side and fear in her eyes, and somehow she made him feel smaller than any weapon ever had. Not weak, not ashamed exactly, human. The word moved through him like a forgotten language. He slowly sat back down. "Then tell me how to help without stealing your dignity." Lena's lips parted, but no answer came. She had spent so long fighting alone that being asked how to be helped felt stranger than being insulted. Finally, she looked down at her hands. "Ruby needs the surgery. I won't pretend she doesn't. But if you do this, she cannot feel like charity. She cannot feel like some rich man saved her because her aunt bled on the right floor." Dante nodded once. "Then she won't." He kept that promise in the only way he knew how at first, which was quietly and completely. Ruby was moved to a better hospital under a pediatric care grant that did not carry Dante's name. Lena learned later that the grant had not existed the week before, but by then the paperwork was clean, the doctors were kind, and Ruby had a private room with a window facing the river. Mira came every day. She brought books, soft socks, little puzzles, and finally a music box shaped like a carousel. When Ruby opened it, tiny painted horses moved in a slow circle while a sweet, delicate melody filled the room. Ruby held it like treasure. "Did you have one when you were little?" Mira smiled, but sadness passed behind it. "No, but I always wanted one." Ruby turned the key again. "When I can breathe better, Aunt Lena says we can go somewhere special." "Where?" "The Winter Pier," Ruby said. "I want to walk all the way to the end without stopping. And I want roasted chestnuts, and hot chocolate, and maybe one of those little paper crowns if they still sell them." Mira glanced at Lena, who sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, recovering slowly. The look between the two women was quiet and full. Both of them understood what it meant for a child to ask for something simple, as if it were a miracle. Dante watched from the doorway. He did not enter right away. The scene before him belonged to a softer world, and for the first time in years, he felt like an intruder in softness. Ruby was laughing because Mira had made one of the carousel horses bow. Lena was smiling, tired but real, her face warmed by something that had nothing to do with fear. Dante had protected Mira all her life by building walls of violence around her. Lena had protected Ruby with double shifts, worn shoes, and a heart that refused to turn bitter. One of them had built an empire, the other had built a home. Only one of those things looked peaceful. But peace did not come easily to men like Dante. A week after Ruby's surgery was scheduled, Lena heard the truth through a half-open hospital conference room door. Dante's men were speaking in low voices. Territory, docks, debt, a captured attacker named Elias Crane. The words were not clear at first, but their meaning was, Dante Varric was not just a wealthy donor, not just a powerful businessman with dangerous friends. He was the center of the darkness people whispered about when they thought no one was listening. His world was made of threats and favors, of men disappearing, of families surviving by making other families afraid. Lena waited until evening, when Ruby was asleep and Mira had gone to the cafeteria for tea. Dante stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She did not ease into it. She was too tired for pretending. "You're Mafia." Dante did not turn around. "Yes." The honesty hurt more than a lie would have. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. Her wound pulled with the movement, but she welcomed the pain because it gave her something simple to understand. "And the man who attacked Mira? He came for me through her, because of something you did." Dante turned then. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. "Because of many things I did, and many things done to me before I became strong enough to answer." Lena nodded slowly. "That is the problem with blood, Dante. Everybody thinks they are answering. Everybody thinks they are balancing the scale. But the scale never balances. It just gets heavier until someone innocent is crushed under it." His jaw tightened. "I built what I built to protect my sister." "And did it?" Lena asked softly. "Or did it bring a blade to her throat in a room full of people?" The words landed hard. Dante looked away, and for the first time Lena saw not the feared man, not the ruler hidden under fine clothes, but the brother beneath it all. A boy, maybe, who had once been helpless and had mistaken fear for safety, because fear was the only tool left in his hand. "I cannot let Ruby grow up near that," Lena continued. "I am grateful for what you have done. I will never stop being grateful, but I have spent my life trying to keep one child safe. I will not trade her future for comfort. I will not let her learn that love means living behind locked doors and armed men." Dante was silent for a long time. "And you?" he asked at last. "What about me? Will you leave too?" Lena's eyes softened, but she did not step closer. "I think a part of you is still deciding whether you want to be feared or known. Until you know the answer, I cannot stand beside you." That night, Dante went to see Elias Crane. The man who had tried to kill Mira sat in a secured room beneath one of Dante's warehouses, bruised, bound, and still burning with hatred. Dante had come there intending to finish what his men had started. It would have been easy. Old habits rose in him like smoke. One command, one bullet, one more ghost folded into the foundation of his empire. But Elias looked up and smiled through split lips. "Now you know," Elias said. "Now you know what it feels like when someone innocent pays for your name." Dante's hand closed around the back of a chair. "You do not know my grief." "No," Elias spat, "but you taught me mine. My brother died at the docks during your war with the Belandi crew. He was 19. He unloaded crates. He was not part of your world, but your world swallowed him anyway. I waited for you to care. You never did. So I thought I would make you care." Dante stared at him, and in Elias's twisted face, he saw something too familiar to hate cleanly. Not innocence. Elias had tried to murder Mira. There was no innocence in that. But there was pain, the kind of pain that grows teeth when no one answers it. The kind Dante had carried for years until it became a crown of knives. Lena's voice returned to him, quiet and steady. "Revenge never ends a story. It only hands the pain to someone else." Dante released the chair. His men watched him, waiting for the order they all understood. Instead, he said, "Call my attorney, then call the district commander. Elias Crane goes to the authorities alive. Send the evidence with him. All of it." One of his men blinked. "Boss?" Dante turned his head, and the room remembered who he was. "Did I speak unclearly?" "No, boss." Elias laughed once, bitter and disbelieving. "You think this makes you clean?" Dante looked at him. "No, but it makes you the last man I punish for teaching me what I should have learned without you." Ruby's surgery happened on a grey morning with rain tapping softly against the hospital windows. Lena held her niece's hand until the nurses wheeled her away. Ruby tried to be brave, but her chin trembled. Mira walked beside the bed as far as they allowed her, carrying the carousel music box and promising to keep it wound until Ruby came back. Dante stood behind Lena, not touching her, not claiming her grief, simply there. When the doors closed, Lena's strength finally broke. She folded forward with a sound so small and wounded that Dante felt it tear through him. He caught her carefully, and this time she let him. She cried against his chest for all the nights she had stayed strong, all the bills she had opened alone, all the times she had smiled for Ruby while terror lived behind her ribs. The surgery lasted hours. Dante made calls, but not the kind he once would have made. He did not threaten doctors or bully nurses, or try to bend fear into a useful shape. He waited. He brought Lena water. He sat with Mira. He let the helplessness exist without trying to kill it. And when the surgeon finally came out with tired eyes and a gentle smile, Lena knew before he said the words. Ruby had made it. The operation had gone well. Her lungs would need time, care, and therapy, but the door to a different life had opened. Lena covered her face and sobbed. Mira cried openly. Dante closed his eyes, and for one silent moment, no one in that waiting room looked like power, or poverty, or danger. They looked like family surviving the same storm. In the months that followed, the city began to change in ways most people did not understand. A warehouse company quietly sold its shares. A private security firm dissolved 3 contracts. Certain dock routes stopped moving at night. Men who once answered only to Dante Varric found themselves offered legal work, severance pay, or a warning never to return to the old business again. It was not clean. It was not simple. Darkness does not leave a man's life just because he opens a window. There were threats. There were betrayals. There were nights Dante came to Lena with blood on his knuckles and shame in his eyes, not because he had chosen violence, but because violence had not yet finished choosing him. Still, he kept moving. He built something new with the same force he had once used to frighten the city. The Ruby House Fund began in a small office above a community clinic, with pale yellow walls, second-hand desks, and a waiting room full of parents who looked exactly the way Lena had once felt, tired, proud, terrified. Dante wanted to put her name on the building. Lena refused. Ruby's name was enough, she said, because Ruby was the reason hope had entered the story at all. Dante asked Lena to lead it, not as a symbol, not as a charity decoration, but because she knew the shape of desperation better than any board member ever could. She knew how people sounded when they were about to give up. She knew which forms made no sense. She knew which mothers had skipped lunch, which fathers were pretending not to cry, which grandmothers needed a chair before they asked for one. The first time Lena walked into the foundation office wearing a soft green dress that fit her body instead of hiding it, the receptionist called her director. Lena almost turned around to see who else had entered. Then she smiled. It was not a sharp smile, not a triumphant one. It was quiet, warm, and stronger than all the cruelty that had tried to shrink her. The world had called her slow, careless, too large, too poor, too ordinary. Now desperate families sat across from her desk, and she gave them something no one had given her easily. She gave them dignity before paperwork. She gave them hope before money. She gave them the feeling that they had been seen. Winter came gently that year. By the time the pier lights went up along the river, Ruby could walk farther than she had in years. She still tired sometimes. Lena still watched her with careful eyes. But on the first clear evening after the season's first snow, Ruby ran ahead across the wooden boards in a red coat, laughing so hard her breath made little clouds in the cold air. Mira ran beside her, holding the carousel music box under one arm and pretending she could not keep up. The pier smelled of roasted chestnuts, hot chocolate, and icy water. Strings of warm lights swayed above the vendor stalls. Somewhere, a street musician played a slow song on a violin, and the sound drifted over the river like a blessing. Lena stood a few steps behind them, wrapped in a cream-colored coat Dante had given her, only after asking if gifts still made her uncomfortable. She had told him some did. He had told her he would keep asking. That was one of the ways he had changed. Not perfectly, not suddenly, but honestly. Dante stood beside her, his hands in the pockets of his dark wool coat. He no longer looked like a man trying to own the night. He looked like a man learning how to stand inside it without becoming part of its darkness. Children passed him without fear. An old vendor nodded at him without lowering his eyes. Mira laughed freely near the chestnut cart, her head tipped back, her face open to the cold sky. Dante watched his sister, and something in his expression loosened. "She looks happy," Lena said. "She is," Dante replied. "I used to think keeping her alive was enough." Lena looked at him. "You were scared. I was cruel." "You were both." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You never make it easy for me." "No," Lena said softly, "but I try to make it true." Ruby came running back with a paper cone of chestnuts clutched in both hands. Her cheeks were bright from the cold, and for once she was only breathless because she had been laughing. "Aunt Lena, I made it all the way to the end and back. I didn't stop once." Lena pressed a hand to her mouth. The pier blurred for a moment. Ruby grinned, proud and alive, and held up the cone. "Also, Dante paid for extra. He said chestnuts are not a limited resource." "He's learning," Lena said, giving Dante a teasing look. Mira joined them, slipping her arm through Ruby's. "There is a carousel farther down, a real one. Ruby says we have to ride it." Lena laughed. "Then I guess we have to." Ruby and Mira ran ahead again, their laughter rising into the winter air. Lena started after them, but Dante gently caught her hand. Not tightly, never tightly now, just enough to ask. She turned back. "I thought you saved Mira that night," he said. "Then I thought you saved Ruby, then the foundation, then maybe half the city, if you keep arguing with hospital boards the way you do." Lena smiled. "I am very annoying in meetings." "You are terrifying in meetings," he corrected. His thumb moved softly over her knuckles. "But I was wrong. The life you saved most was mine." Lena looked toward the carousel lights turning in the distance. "Saving someone does not always mean standing in front of a blade," she said. "Sometimes it means helping them remember they can still choose who they become." Dante's eyes stayed on her face. "And who have I become?" Lena squeezed his hand. "Someone who is trying. That matters more than you think." The carousel music began to play as Ruby and Mira climbed onto painted horses under a canopy of golden bulbs. Lena and Dante walked toward them together, not as a poor cleaner and a feared Mafia boss, not as a woman who had been overlooked and a man who had been obeyed, but as two people remade by one night neither of them could forget. Behind them was blood, fear, and the long shadow of everything Dante had once been. Ahead of them was no perfect fairy tale, no easy promise that darkness would never return. But there was Ruby, laughing in the cold air. There was Mira, free beneath the lights. There was Lena, standing tall, in a body the world had mocked, carrying a heart it had failed to harden. And there was Dante Varric, no longer untouchable, no longer lost, walking beside the woman who had shown him that true power was not the ability to make people fear your name. It was the courage to protect life without owning it, to repair what you had broken, and to become gentle without becoming weak. By the time the carousel slowed, Ruby waved from her painted horse and shouted for them to hurry. Lena laughed and pulled Dante forward. He followed, smiling in a way the city would not have recognized. Above them, snow began to fall, soft and quiet, covering the pier, the river, the rooftops, and the old sins of a man who had finally chosen a different ending. And under those winter lights, Lena Morley, the woman once treated as invisible, watched the people she loved breathe freely at last.